fullest liberties. And by voting against them, voting against policies that don't allow them to do that, how can you look someone in the face and say that you're truly a friend? Because you're not.
And I think one of the hardest things reading this book for me to digest and to say out loud to myself, and I literally looked in my mirror and I said it, and it seems ridiculous to do, but I looked in my mirror and I said, Michael, you're a racist. And it's because this book offered me a new definition. I choose to check my prejudice. And what you're describing that Scott is doing in his shop is he's checking his prejudice. Mm-hmm. But racism being a system, I have to say I benefit from a system that backs me up because of the color of my skin. And even without having made this a conscious choice, I'm racist. I have been brainwashed into race. I have all the subconscious messages in my head about black people being criminal. You cross the street when there's black teenagers across the street late at night, all that stuff drilled into my brain, and there's no escaping it. And it's going to be, I think the hardest thing for white people to do is to admit, A, I'm racist, B, I'm always going to be racist. And it doesn't mean I'm a bad person. As a matter of fact, it makes me a good person to admit this is part of the fabric of my unconscious. And I think it makes each of us a good person when we challenge it. And when we open the door to talking to Chester or people who can share with us that reflection back at what those things have done to us. And so recognizing that racism is a system. So white people have the burden of talking with other white people. But as you aptly point out, we have an obligation to vote according to the best means of ending the system. I'm not thrilled personally about Biden, for example. He doesn't get me going. He never got me going. There were other candidates who were running. Cory Booker, I loved him. I love Kamala. Elizabeth Warren. I mean, there were so many good candidates in this election. We ended up with Biden. But I am not getting on social media and saying anything negative about Biden because the stakes are so high. And the only candidate who's got a chance at dealing with the system is Biden. So he's going to get the full weight of my support based exactly, David, on what you're saying. And that's
Hey, Michael.
Yeah.
Have you read this book? It came out about mid-2000s called The Wisdom of Crowds.
I've heard of that book.
Yeah, it's and so you look how Biden just took lead. He really just came and took lead. I look at that as being the wisdom of crowds. It's like the crowds of people individually, but collectively, they know Biden's the guy that's going to be to get us through this stuff. I
pray so.
No, and also the whole realizing the institutionalized racism. It's just really, it's like, look what we've been cheated in a way, that we've always saw things through one prism, that we didn't see things, the big rainbow and all that. And now we can see, but look at all while growing up, we were cheated of that. And that's sad.
Howard Zinn, and I'm going to paraphrase him, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Howard Zinn, I consider him to be the greatest American historian. He has a book called A People's History of the United States. Even if you're not a fan of history, he tells history from a very balanced racial, ethnic, religious background. He's incredible. And he talks about the oppressor, and I'm going to paraphrase him. The oppressor is a victim in his own way. This came up for me the other day when I was talking with somebody about feminism. And I said, part of the reason that I want women to have their equal place in society is that it will be healing to men too. Because when a boy is told for his first time when he cries, don't do it, you're being like a girl, and he's told explicitly to shut down a huge aspect of his humanity in favor of a false strength, he becomes a victim. And then in that false idea of masculinity, he becomes a victimizer. Each of us as white people in that same vein have been told these lies about race. We've been brainwashed. We've been indoctrinated. It's offensive. And in that way, we have been made victims in this too. So when we challenge our racism, it is indeed to the benefit of people of color, but it is also extraordinarily to our own benefit. And I forget who said it recently online. When white people see the problems of race in this country, not as a problem of people of color, but as their own problem, then something will happen. And this book has helped me to see a lot about how this is a white person's problem. And it is for white people to deal with when we educate one another. So who's got some thoughts? I know you know me, I'm chatty Kathy.
Michael, I have a thought, I guess. You were bringing up politics and the presidential race a little bit ago, and racism in general with each of the parties. How does Trump get away with saying things like no one's done more for Black people than me? Why doesn't he not get called out for that more? In the press, people just like let him. I haven't seen him get called out for it at all. Maybe he does, but it seems to me that he's baiting his base with some of the things that he says, and then out of the other side of his mouth that, well, no one's done more for people of color than me. And I don't see how I don't understand why he gets away with that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Because he's white. He's white. That's why he gets away with it.
That's part of it. I have a friend from Catholic school that I got into it online with about the Black Lives Matter movement. And he suggested I read a book that is actually called, and it's out there, this is a real book, How Trump Made Black America Great Again. A Black author wrote it. And I'm stunned. I was like flabbergasted that a Black author would write that. As far as Trump as a whole, though, now I grew up with the executive director of Right to Life of New Mexico. I am the apple that fell pretty damn far from the tree. And I look at my mother, and I look at her convictions. And she's not pro-life, she's pro-fetus. We can get into that whole discussion, but Reagan promised that he would end abortion. He had 8 terms to do it. He was popular, he could have. He didn't. H.W. Bush promised it. He had 1 term, he didn't. Then Clinton comes, then we get W. W promises he has 8 terms, he doesn't. There are certain things that Republicans have always played upon. First of all, fear, which we're seeing so much. If anyone saw even segments of the Republican National Convention, all of it was anger baiting, fear baiting, and playing to the ignorance of people. That's the Republican base. And so he plays on things like their evangelicism, their pro-life stuff. And he's gotten them, and he's basically he's a cult leader. He just happens to have an extraordinarily large cult. He could say anything and they'd believe it. I believe many progressives and liberals called him on it, but if you call him on it, if we're calling him on it to each other, then we're preaching to the choir. And if we call him on it to his fan base, it's fake news. And so much of, and that's why so many of the lies that he tells, and they're endless, go unchallenged, because either A, we already know it, or B, it's fake news. And that's the twist he's created in the fabric of our national dialogue. That's the best answer I could throw at you.
I think there's I think the failure is just really to look at it as a whole. You know, as within everything, there's opportunists in anything. There's people that are trying to make money, right? So within the Republican Party, think of it. Would they say in the last election, 8% of African Americans voted for Trump? So if you were doing a scientific survey and 92% of the people said something versus 8%, what would you believe?
The 92%.
Yeah, it would be overwhelming. You would believe what that 92% of people were saying. But people don't look at it that way. They look at those, they're like, oh, see, he said it, so it must be. But
Right.
they don't realize that it's a sliver of the African American population. And then also things that Trump is claiming that he did are just part of typical economics. As if you think of unemployment as it decreases, first it decreases with white America, then it decreases along with African Americans. And as unemployment rates get lower, guess what? Incomes rise because there's more competition for people to work. So it's just a nature of economics that he actually inherited from the Obama years. So
The man who actually did do something for people of color in this country.
right.
Yeah.
Hey, Michael,
Yeah, John.
now where do we take this into your classroom? You know, I've been talking to, I'm looking at Michael's at our school, and I've been asking teachers about how their resources are diverse. What if we studied the African American experience in film, or study African American filmmakers and the representation throughout history and how things were kind of parallel? That would be really interesting, especially at our school where we do have the power to create the curriculum we want. And along those lines, I think that would be really powerful.
Well, Denzel Washington posted on Twitter, and I'm paraphrasing him, everybody's got their lane in this. For some, it's getting out there and protesting, and I love and applaud those brave people out there taking tear gas and punishment and being shot, literally shot by a 17-year-old kid who's being called a hero. Oh my God, it's so offensive. It's mind-boggling.
Right.
I applaud them in their lane. My lane and your lane, Jonathan, that's education. And I think one of the things we can do at Max, we do a Shakespeare Fest every year. And everybody knows and loves Shakespeare, but he's just another old white dude. And, some people talk about, let's bring Edgar Allan Poe. Well, he's another old white dude. Let's bring Sandra Cisneros. Let's bring Maya Angelou. Let's bring James Baldwin. Let's have that mix, because what I'm learning to do to decolonize my own mind, there's a whole comment there. I'm reading Black authors. There's novels by Black authors that have Black characters, and they're entertaining. I'm getting a lot out of it. Bitch Planet, which is great because it's got Black women. It's got it's a truly feminist comic book. I'm loving it. It's a comic book. It is entertaining, but it is taking me out of my zone. And I think for us as educators, for language arts teachers, bringing in authors of color, women, and just changing their perspective. Because the cool thing about those stories is if they're well written, they pull you in. And if the main character happens to be, say, a Black woman, you are invested in the story of a Black woman. You are hoping for her success, not her failure. And you are then, in the process of being entertained by the experience, brought to understand what happens to a Black woman in real life. And I think for us in education, one of the ways we can decolonize is to do that. But even something as simple as the posters in our classroom. Let's say you've got a CPR poster in your room. What color is the person in the CPR poster usually? It's usually white skin. So what we do is we either buy or create, we can have our students create it, CPR posters that are either race neutral or represent different diversity. So for you and me as educators, we decolonize everything and we bring in those perspectives. Since we're on that, let me put that as an idea for the group, because each of us is doing different things. For people like me and Jonathan, the answer for this is pretty easy. The challenge might not be, but the answer for us is, what do we do to end systemic racism? Well, we're in the system of education. And so we have something we can do within that system. Within your own lanes, where do you take this from here?
Thing that I can think of.
You're unmuted. Go ahead.
So, Michael, that was a long pause there. You know, I'm not a teacher, and I think the community that we live in, I think the easiest thing, or the biggest thing we can do, is to call it out when we see it. And I think we talked about that maybe in our first or second session with other white people.
Ending the back room or the green room.
The green room and the white solidarity.
Yeah.
So I'm posting going forward, maybe my notes here might help lead some of the discussion. So Michael, you're saying the best thing to do right now, and Melanie, you agree, and I agree too, we call it when we see it. We do not let white people feel comfortable in that back room. We want other white people to be scared shitless of saying something racist. So let's see, we can seek out the information from books, websites, films. Oh, one of the conversations I had with somebody recently was, in the new Batman movie, Commissioner Gordon is going to be played by a black actor. And as always, white people aren't having it. And I got into it with a white person on Twitter over it. And I was also pleased to see I wasn't in the minority. I was in the majority of people saying what I was saying. And what I said comes kind of from this book. What we need in global media, which is, American media is global, is representations of people of color that are positive, because there's been enough representation of black people in the media as criminals and thugs. And this guy went with the whole, but this is a traditional comic book character. And I said, you know, comic book characters are archetypes. It doesn't really matter. They are, Commissioner Gordon is an idea. He is a grizzled old cop who wants to clean up Gotham City. He's the best friend of Batman. Does it really matter what color his skin is? And it just went on and on and on. It was like, so one of the things that white people can do, by the way, because we have our vote, Dave's right, but we also have power with our money. And I honestly think if we started spending our money at cinema and putting our money where our mouth is and going to see films by black directors, for me, I love Black Panther, God rest Chadwick Boseman, oh, that's a loss. But Black Panther was a blockbuster. And I want to let Hollywood know that I'm interested in characters of color. So one of the things I know I can do when I'm looking at this is I can spend my dollars letting Hollywood know I want this. The books that I bought I'm going to let publishing companies know. I want stories that aren't just about white characters. I want comic books that don't just have white superheroes.
Michael, speaking of superheroes, I don't know if you've seen the Spider-Man Into the Multiverse, where they have a girl Spider-Man, they have a young black boy who's a Spider-Man in alternate realities. And that was an extremely well done piece of work. I mean, I don't know who the directors were, but that was actually a lot of fun to watch.
Miles Morales is kind of an interesting character in comic books. He actually comes from the Ultimate Universe. In the comic books, and this is me nerding out, Peter Parker dies, and he's replaced by Miles Morales. My only complaint about Miles Morales, they did a great job with his character, and they gave him an authentic background. But I would love to see comic books innovate characters entirely from scratch. What they did was they used Spider-Man's popularity to kind of slap a cone of paint on it. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I don't know if you know.
It's just like casting a black person to play a Shakespeare character, like Hamlet or something like that. It's still
You're right.
it's that, I think, but it's not a I don't know where you're going to go with that.
It's like having Virginia Woolf as
Can you say that again,
a
John?
gay couple. It doesn't work.
Right.
Say that again.
It's
But
like
the thing
casting Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf.
With a gay.
But the thing is, never been an issue of casting white characters to be in the place of a black person. So that's occurred over time. So there's never been that issue.
No.
So yeah. So but in general, I definitely wouldn't want you just to go out and see a movie because there's black people in it, right? Go be open to movies that you're interested in, not because of your interest, right? Just try to get out of who the characters are, who's playing the characters, but something that you're interested in. That's kind of where I would say.
I think that's, yeah.
Michael, open the chat and see if we can make a list of American films.
Open the chat. Now I got to remember how to open the chat.
I don't know. I was just thinking, how many do we know?
I don't know if you saw recently, but there's actually a comic book shop that's native owned in Albuquerque. And now the name Red something comic books. And Marvel is working with this comic book shop to create authentic native characters. And that's pretty cool. And I can't figure out how to open chat right now. I have it closed in my personal meeting room because this is where I meet with students, and the last thing you want them doing is using chat.
Yeah. Well, that's cool if you can't.
So another thing
thought
economically,
it'd be interesting if we can name 10 at least.
another thing economically that I think everybody can do, even if you're in the school, in the school system and administrative area, when we all have an opportunity to discuss how the dollar should be spent, say in that district, one of the things that we can all, because my industry is big, so for any suppliers that we use, we send out questionnaires. There's so much information that the suppliers have to provide us to show that that they're suitable to add to our approved supplier list. And that questionnaire can have things such as, are they environmentally conscious? Do they recycle? Do they have that? You can push the district to add things like that, whether also, you can also add the social element in there. What percentage of their business goes out to, whether it's minority-owned businesses and stuff. So those things can be put in there to add a ranking to their score, to then add them as somebody who can be purchased from in the district. And those are ways also to push being socially conscious on businesses, so that way you have some control from, at least from your side, on how they're adding and what dollars they get from your organization.
There's an organization out here that Jonathan and I got online with. Jonathan, do you remember the name of the organization? It was the webinar we attended.
That we got online with?
Yeah. Where they've got a ranking system.
I thought I was trying to think of something funny. No.
They've got a ranking system for schools and businesses.
Oh,
based on racial practices. And Jonathan, you and I had discussed, so they're doing, Dave, what you had suggested. This is an organization that will publish a list of schools and businesses who are dealing with race effectively. And so Jonathan and I had talked about trying to work with that organization to get our school in compliance with those things so that we could get on their list of.
oh yeah, I know what you mean. They had a thing this summer. Yeah, I can research and find out. But yeah, it's really to be a golden snake. It's like you're rated as such, and you're really in tune to, and also the message you're sending. That's where we, on our journey as a school with what we're doing with this lawsuit out here, which was about equity councils, is just really, what are we sending? What's the message we're sending? The resources we're using, like Michael, you said, like looking at things through a lens of equity, and really being in tune to that, and realizing that it's critical that we make sure of that.
Hey, son, do you mind if I put you on the spot for a second?
Go ahead.
At REDW, now, so this organization that Jonathan and I are talking about also gives gold rankings to businesses. Maybe something that we could talk about later is how REDW might get involved in this to build up its practices dealing with race in a manner that this organization could approve of.
Well, our firm is basically we have not actually, my firm white is not the majority to speak of. So even my team, we have no white person. So actually, when we joke about racism, right, and then a lot of coworkers are from Mexico, really. So we make a joke about Mexican people or Asian people. But the firm-wise, we have strict policy about equality on recruiting and then during the employment. So I mean, to be honest, I personally really didn't experience any like unfair treatment from our company. So this is our last meeting. So I was thinking about, how can I apply this to my daily life? So I was thinking, but my environment is mostly surrounded by, I guess I really didn't have chance to experience that inequality in my life. So what I was thinking is that I educate myself about the system, and then kind of educate of awareness of the existence of inequality in this system. But I don't know, Michael asked me about our firm, how my firm performs, to implement that equality in our company. I guess we have really strict HR policies. So whenever, I mean, if you do something that, you say something stupid, then it, of course, affect your career. So people really be careful about, say things and then, act. So, I think I'm more like thinking about myself, that how I can be part of this process. So my conclusion is I just to educate myself more about, and then more cognizant about this issue, because otherwise it's going to be just kind of in the backside of my mind that I don't recognize it. So I think it's more important to recognize it and then have the awareness of the issue.
Thanks, hey son. I know you love me putting you on the spot like that. I kind of like you. We should get married.
I want to hear your backstory.
I'll tell you that
Another time.
backstory at another time there.
Over beers.
Over beers, you got it. So as I'm looking at my notes here on the screen, one of them that struck me was, if a person of color trusts me enough to take the risk of telling me, then I'm doing well. And when I recall my response to that whole exchange about Karen on Facebook, I had 3 people of color challenge me. And my response wasn't necessarily that great, but, and it was 3 former students. So now one thing I've learned is to appreciate it, because one thing she talked about in this last part of the book is to have gratitude for the challenge. While I'm on that point, I want to say, Dave, thank you. In our last gathering here, you didn't have to do this. The burden wasn't on you and shouldn't be on you, but you have been so helpful in sharing your insights with us that anytime I say or do something that proves that my head is up my ass about racism, I will be glad and proud to be challenged, and especially by someone like you. So thank you for helping us white folks get through this.
No problem. And like I said, you know, it's like, it's a conversation. And to me, if we're willing to have the conversation, that's the way we should be going, right? And we should be trying to understand everything so we can move forward.
Thank you for helping us do that. Let's see some other notes here. Anyone got thoughts, ideas, questions?
I wanted to point out, I think it's in a later chapter, but you had a personal note, Michael, in maybe at the end of chapter 10. And it was something to the gist of, I think along the lines of this conversation. It was right at the end. I think it was the last personal note. I thought it was chapter 10, but
they're all in purple, so I'll scroll up and look at the purple.
I'm trying to remember what it was along the lines of absolutely okay for people of color not to give a damn about the discomfort of white people. So it's kind of along the lines of what you were just saying, but I also think it's also why we have to step back in this time when there's a lot of anger being expressed and frustration and rage, because there are so many people who have not had a voice for so long, or have not had power for so long, and they're coming into their voice and they're coming into their power, or they're taking it, or they're making room for it, or they're stepping into the space. And it's like, we have to back off and stop fighting against that, and stop saying there's something wrong with a Black person who's angry, who's being able to express their anger for the first time, or groups of people who are able to express their anger for the first time. It goes back to what she was saying about a woman that she was working with was talking about how as Black women, we have to be so even and calm, and we can't ever be emotional. And it's like, no, we're human beings. Everybody has emotions. And as white people, we have to step back and allow, and not, I hate to use the word allow, that's ridiculous. We have to just get out of the way so that these emotions can be expressed.
And she also mentions one of the things that we can do as white people. And again, I would love to encourage you all to read Howard Zinn is to be aware of the history. So when people are talking about the vandalism of buildings in Kenosha and in Rochester or wherever, and they say this is not appropriate, I say, first, it is. All the nonviolent stuff they did didn't work. When, you know, Kaepernick takes a knee, he's disrespecting the flag. You find a way to dismiss all the nonviolent stuff. Now you've got an excuse to dismiss this. But then I say, here's your history for you. The founding fathers were members of a group called the Sons of Liberty. And the Sons of Liberty were basically a terrorist organization built on propaganda. They did such things as grab British tax collectors and tar and feather them, and then have them paraded in the streets. And to understand tar and feathering, we're talking about hot tar that delivered second or third degree burns, and then feathers stuck to them. They burnt down the mansion of a governor who happened to be a Tory. These things that our founders did prior to the revolution that gave us this great nation were acts of terrorism and acts of violence. So when these people,
the Boston Tea Party,
and
dumping all that property into the sea, that's a riot. There you go.
Absolutely. So our country is built on these things. So when white people tell me this is not the way to affect change, I say, kiss my ass and read a history book.
Right.
Because if there hadn't been vandalism, if there hadn't been,
nobody would have noticed.
We wouldn't be seeing it on television. There wouldn't be a dialogue. So it's not like we can love vandalism, and it's not like any of us are going to love violence. But when, I think I'm going to paraphrase Malcolm X, when the peaceful means get exhausted, what else is there? And I agree with you. As white people, we gotta suck it up. That's just all.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
Maybe not allow it, but we gotta suck it up. We just gotta say,
yeah,
we made this inevitable.
And we have to understand why it's happening and be, compassionate and empathetic for why it's happening.
And certainly we have to stand up and say that the destruction of property is no reason to shoot people.
Right.
So we got about 10 more minutes. Let me see what else we've got on some things, our final takeaway points, because we've all kind of discussed where we go from here. I liked this where she started talking about, this phrasing she used. Would you be willing to grant me the opportunity to repair the racism I perpetrated? This gives us, we're all going to screw things up. Just looking at some of these notes. If you see anything that strikes a chord as I'm looking through, I love this one. Imagine first responders at the scene of an accident rushing to comfort the person whose car struck a pedestrian while the pedestrian lies bleeding on the street. Let's all come to the rescue of Karen over here. That one made me that was a pretty good one.
That's a good one.
I like this one. If we whites want to interrupt the system, we have to get racially uncomfortable and be willing to examine the effects of our racial engagement. This includes not indulging in whatever reactions we have, anger, defensiveness, self-pity, and so forth. And for me, it means not being polite anymore. We've been too polite to talk about racism. As white people, we've enabled this white solidarity. So somebody says something racist and we just ignore it. And we can go away saying, well, I'm not racist. But as this book aptly points out, it's not enough anymore to say I'm not racist. One must now say I am anti-racist. We can't let that stuff slide. And so I think one thing all of us can do is, and we've said it earlier, is we can't let it slide.
Yeah, I think that's just having the integrity to let people know where your boundaries are, and that also too, they're not accepted with you if they don't conform to your moral convictions, and regardless of however they can help you, right? So whether it's that social circle that helps you move on professionally or whatever, you still have you have to have that integrity to be like, no, that's not acceptable. These are my values. And if not, I'll just have to find a different circle to be in.
And I think in a previous meeting, we discussed it too. And that even means a job. And I'm proud that's not going to happen on the job that I'm on. But if I was working at a place where they didn't seem to give a shit when I challenged them on racism, that's not a job worth having. Unfortunately, I'm not in that position, but I think it's extreme enough that we have to defend, as Dave points out, that integrity has to be important, and we can't cave on it. So just looking at some of these notes, anyone resonating with some of these things it says that things we can do? Oh, here's one. When we talk about, I think one of the reasons that we've tried to be too polite about race, while we worry that if we have revealed our racism in any way, the people of color in our lives will give up on us. That the author found the opposite to true. When we engage in the feedback and seek to, I didn't correct this at all, seek to repair the breach, the relationship deepens. I'm better friends now with you, Dave, than when we knew each other in high school, that's for sure.
Oh, we weren't really that opposite in high school. Listen, I've known you for a long time, so.
This is true. The Wayback Machine is on.
Wow, I'm impressed. I don't know anybody.
You've got two old high school buddies.
Yeah, Melanie and I knew each other. We didn't go to high school together, though. Dave and I
But
went
we've known each other since high school.
since you were
Yeah, we went to high school together. We didn't really hang out that much in high school, but we still knew each other and talked to each other.
You guys are,
We go back even further than that. You went to Jackson, didn't you?
you're scary.
Oh, we went to Oñate together.
Oh my God, that's right. We're back all the way to elementary school.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay, I'm out of here, man. I don't know anybody in college or high school. I mean, shit.
So this one resonated with me here too. So when I looked in the mirror and said, I'm racist, that was before I read this, and I love this. I don't feel guilty about racism. And this is what when white people get defensive, I want to tell them this. I don't feel guilty about racism. I didn't choose this socialization, and it could not be avoided. But I am responsible for my role in it. To the degree that I have done my best in each moment to interrupt my participation, I can rest with a clear conscience. So for me, the thing that hurt the most when I was called was the implication that I was a racist. But and that's a response that we're all going to get when we challenge it, because I don't believe any of us have chosen to be friends with people we think are bad people. But because there's that myth that racism equals bad, people have this in response. I know I did. And this,
Michael, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead. Cut me off anytime.
That first sentence there is really hard to swallow for me. I mean, how can you not have any guilt?
It's the second part there, that you didn't choose this socialization.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't choose it, you didn't choose it, but you don't have any guilty conscience about that at all?
I think, well, this is what the author said, but I agree with it. I am not personally responsible for building this system. I'm not responsible for the slave trade. I'm not responsible for the genocide of Native Americans. This is one of the things also white people do to absolve themselves, true. But you and I and all of us having this discussion recognize the system now. We cannot pretend it doesn't exist. If we went back to pretending it didn't exist, then we'd have something to be guilty about. if we fight this system, if we stand up to other white people and we do our part here in the lanes that we choose, then we don't have a reason to feel guilty. We might make mistakes, and we might be ashamed of a mistake we made here and there, but that's life. And as long as we do our best from this point forward to interrupt this system, then we have no reason to feel guilt or shame about it.
I think we take it into action. Like I was talking earlier, Michael, about our school and our classrooms and our daily lives, that we become action.
I think you got cut off on that last part, Jonathan.
I know my internet's out here. I think if we become action oriented, because being guilt, if you're operating out of guilt, I see it to where, what can I do to make a difference? Stay forward.
So Michael, in Aspen, you mentioned that the best thing you can do is stand up to it when you see it. You didn't
Call
create,
it out. Yeah, just like we've been talking about, yeah.
but you didn't create the system. You're not responsible for the brainwashing that happened to you, that happened to Melanie, that happened to anyone in your community. But if you challenge that brainwashing, then you are interrupting the system. And I think at the most basic level in the where do we go from here, it's challenging that.
Yeah.
So
It's
And I think for like,
not going to go away quickly.
go ahead, Dave.
I think for the guilt portion, like I think that a big portion of like just the socialization of it, and part of it is maybe how you're raised, the groups that you were brought into. I think in those senses, those are items that at some point may not have been in your control. You may have, it was deemed acceptable. But that moment that you determine that, hey, this is not right, and I need to go forward differently. One, I think you really have to say within yourself is like, you have to look and you have to, one, forgive yourself for what you didn't know at that time. And now that you know what you should be doing, there should be some big forgiveness of yourself. Those people maybe that you may cross paths with, that you had interacted in the past that in an inappropriate way, you should have those conversations with those individuals and reach out and say, hey, this is where I'm at now. And I know that we had this interaction, but, and it was inappropriate. I realize it, but this is where I'm at now. And this is how I'm moving forward. And then you move forward with conviction and try to change.
And the strategies that she gave us for the repair, I think they're excellent strategies. Like coming full circle, going back to those people from over a month ago when I had this situation, using that language. Is it okay for us to discuss what happened when I was posting about Karen? And, I'm going to go right back to this book and use literally words that she gave me to help repair that breach. So I can reaffirm the alliance with persons of color who are willing to challenge me, because as a white person, I know I need people who will challenge me. I think, David, you mentioned forgiveness too. I think as hard as it is when our fellow white people say something misinformed, maybe not out of bad intention, we also have to be forgiving of them, unless they refuse to see. If somebody's willing to see, then we have to show them extreme empathy. Say, I get it, we're all same brainwashing. We're in this together. The new white solidarity should be, hey, we were all brainwashed. Let's help each other break it. Any final thoughts? I so appreciate everybody for joining me in this. I hope I was a decent moderator. I know I'm very talkative. I mean, it's no surprise to anybody. It's kind of like saying, hey, the sun came up this morning. Dave,
Tomorrow is another day.
thank you all for joining. Dave, is Erica feeling better?
She's still a little under the weather.
She didn't get
Yeah.
COVID or anything, did she?
No, it's not COVID. Yeah, it's some other issue.
Okay. But you're taking good care of her?
Oh yeah, definitely.
If you'll pass on a message for me, because she's got her finger on the pulse of this for her job, I hope I can take advantage of opportunities as a white person to reach out to her when I have certain uncertainties that another white person needs to help another white person with.
Oh, I'm sure she would be open for that.
Okay, cool. And I think all of us, should reach out to each other in those moments because, again, the burden is on us right now.
And if you ever have anything that you want to talk to me about, you can always call me and be like, hey, I'm having trouble with this. What's your impression of it? What's your experience of it? I'll be honest with you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This dialogue will continue in many different capacities in all of our lives as we are, I want to try to end on an optimistic note because we're all feeling a great sense of fear. I remember, looking at snippets from the Republican National Convention and then watching Trump's numbers go up afterwards. I thought, oh my God, this is the seventh circle of hell and I don't know what to do. It's easy to succumb to these feelings of anxiety, but I think maybe for the first meaningful time in my lifetime, this dialogue is real because, and I think it's going somewhere. And I think if Biden is elected, this dialogue will continue to go forward. We will continue to talk about what is the nature of policing in this country, what needs to change. And I think from this pit of despair, we're about to round a corner and go to a place of hope. It's going to be a fight, for sure, I think. But I think we're soldiers in that fight now, not passive observers of that. And I love that about this moment. And so in the same moment that the clouds are hanging over my head, I'm sitting there going, man, but when those clouds clear, we're talking about the rebirth of a nation. So,
Well said.
Thank you, Michael, for putting this together.
Yeah, and thank you for facilitating. You did a great job.
I appreciate you all so much. And let's stay in touch with each other, especially when these issues come up. Dave, thank you so much. Jonathan,
No problem.
It's great to have Jonathan as a boss. When your boss joins you in something like this and you have an ally in your boss, it's so cool. I have to say, so we're going to see some good things happen at the school. I've already talked to my boss about it.
Yeah, nice. You're going to get a raise, I think.
Jonathan.
Not.
No, there's a whole formula about how that happens.
Yeah, right.
Sure.
It's out of his hands.
No, it's worthwhile just to have an employer who, with his sensibilities, who is driving this into the school and making this a real dialogue. And I'm blessed. Not every human being, even among educators, because there are some racist educators out there. Not every human being gets to say they work in a place where this system is being challenged, and intentionally. Despite pushback. Who's pushing back? That's another conversation. Well, everybody, I know that there's alcohol in my fridge. I'm hoping that there's alcohol in yours. It's Saturday night, and I think we all know where we go from here.
Have a good holiday.
Blessed.
Weekend.
Have a good rest of the weekend.
Take care, everybody. With love.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.